Thank you all for coming. Good morning, everybody. My name is Adam Connor. I am VP of Organizational Design at MadPow. And for the past 3 years, we've had a track here at HXR around the culture of innovation. We've had some awesome speakers talking about kind of the bigger topics that many of us are familiar with: collaboration and co-creation, storytelling and prototyping, and experimentation and learning from failure. And at the end of those tracks, at the end of those sessions, we heard kind of the same conversations come up. I get these concepts. I love these concepts. How can I take this back to work and make something like this stick within my organization, within my situations? And so that's what we wanted to tackle with this year's track. How can we bring these ideas that we value and that we keep talking about back to our organization, and what realistic steps can we take to infuse design and innovation into the way we do our work and the way we work with others? So today's speakers will share their stories, strategies, and tactics that they've experienced and used as they've done just that. So with that, I'd like to bring up our first speakers, Dr. Stella Saffo. And Stella is an HIV primary care physician and assistant professor of medicine at Mount Sinai. Dr. Saffo is the program director for health systems design at the Arnold Institute for Global Health in the Mount Sinai Health System, where she leads the design and development of effective population healthcare models. And also Bruno Silva. As a head of design and product development at the Arnold Institute for Global Health in the Mount Sinai Health, Bruno researches user needs, designs services, and product innovations that are user-centric for the improvement of population health. He's passionate about technology and the role it can play to affect social change, and his goal is to ensure that innovation benefits the entire society, not only a privileged few. His work has been featured in many prominent design publications and displayed at the MoMA New York, Cooper Hewitt Museum, and Dumbo Arts Festival. So please join me in welcoming our first speakers.
Hi, everyone. So Bruno and I are really glad to be here to talk to you today. We're going to talk to you from the perspective of being inside a health system. So I guess to begin, who here thinks that the U.S. health system right now is doing pretty well? Raise your hand if you think that we're in good shape. So I happen to agree with you, which is really depressing because I actually provide care in this health system. And I have the pleasure of being a practicing physician to HIV patients in New York now. But when I practiced in Boston, and also when I practiced in Ghana, I saw similar themes of this brokenness in healthcare. And what's even worse is that I haven't been practicing very long, but colleagues of mine are already heading towards being burned out and wanting to leave medicine. And that's scary because you need primary care doctors to take care of all of us, right? So it's forced me to ask this question of what is it that we need to do to make this system better? And I'm someone who believes passionately in medicine. I want to be a doctor all the time. But I've actually taken some time away from doing full-time medicine to work with people like Bruno to figure out what we can do to fix this. And so the issues that we're seeing in our healthcare system right now and the brokenness of our healthcare system is something that we have to be focused on, again, because of the ways in which it's driving both physician exit, patient dissatisfaction, and so on and so forth. So the question is, how can different clinics, different governments, health systems address this brokenness? And we at Sinai have taken an effort into this. So let me tell you a little bit about Mount Sinai Health System. It is one of the largest employers in New York City. Where there's lots and lots of competition, but Sinai has bought up a whole bunch of hospitals. So we have a 7-hospital system. We see over 1 million independent patient visits, and we employ about 40,000 people. And so we need to get this right because we put a lot of effort and energy and investments into this. And our problem at Sinai, I think, is one that you are all probably familiar with, which is that healthcare no longer is paid for in the way that it used to be paid for. So it used to be that for every patient that I saw, I got paid. And now it's for these individual patients, I get paid a lump sum and I need to be able to keep them healthy. Well, that's great on the one hand because I want to be in the business of keeping people healthy. I don't want to get paid to, take care of sick people. And so what this ends up meaning is that we're really thinking about how we can focus on preventative medicine and how we can focus on health and wellness. And I'm sure you guys have heard it in the terms of value-based care, population health management. And for Sinai, we've really gone ahead and said we want to be population health managers. So we'll say things like, if our beds are filled, it means that we failed. Like, no hospital system really believes that because they want you to come in, they want you to get treated. But we're saying we want to figure out ways to keep you out of the hospital and keep you safe and healthy. So we have a system, as we said, that is broken, and we have these issues around these new payment models. We have antiquated care models. We have patients that are dissatisfied. We have clinicians that are dissatisfied. We have healthcare systems that have a lot in the game. And we also happen to have a population that's actually getting, if you will, more chronic illnesses as we go along. So again, the stakes are high. What are we going to do? And the nice thing about this is that when you're really desperate, I think as healthcare is, you start to think outside of the box and you start to say, okay, well, clearly what we've done before hasn't worked. So as you guys probably know, most people in healthcare are fairly hierarchical. And there's a real sense of, I'm Dr. Sappho and I'm this person and that person. And, there's a way in which, and there's a presentation and a culture of healthcare that can sometimes be very oppressive. And we think in healthcare that we have the answers, right? Certainly we can save lives, so we must have the answers to figure out some of these problems. So we've worked in the past with administrators, clinicians, with business leaders to really start to think through some of the issues that we're having in healthcare. But because, again, as I said, the stakes are so high and we're doing so poorly, we've now had to say, well, let's figure out who else may have the answers. And it's ended up that people like Bruno have entered the healthcare space and are helping us to think through how we can solve and design for some of these challenges. So Bruno and I lead a team of individuals that includes very, very different backgrounds than we would normally be used to seeing. And these are Bruno, who's our human-centered design person. We have our project manager, process engineer, and then we have someone who's actually a mathematician who thinks in terms of engineering, who has come in and offered a very, very different perspective. And I will say, when I started working with this team, we would be talking and I would just be kind of talking about healthcare the way that I normally talk about. And they would ask me questions like, but why does the wait time have to be so long? And I'd be like, what do you mean why does the wait time have to be so long? Patients have to wait, that's how and just fundamental basic questions that are like, well, why are we doing it this way? Let's think about it a different way. And so the way that our team approaches the work is that we're thinking both from the top down and the bottom up, which for you guys is so obvious, but for a lot of our health systems isn't. We're thinking about how we can use the current resources that we have. And we're also thinking about this idea of like who our users are all the time. Again, these are not things that many of my colleagues are so used to kind of thinking through. So what we wanted to share with you today from Bruno's perspective is to really start to think through some of these high-level insights that we've gotten. Because what we've realized is that, sure, we can bring a whole bunch of people to the table and say, help us fix these problems, but we are lacking a common language. And without this common language to understand how the academic medical center works versus how, you guys work, what ends up happening is that we end up talking past each other and missing opportunities to be able to really design for the things that we need to design for. So my question to Bruno is, now that you've been in the healthcare system for some time, what would you suggest to non-clinicians and people who aren't traditional in healthcare about how best to engage with traditional healthcare environments?
Thank you, Stella. Hi, everyone. I'm Bruno Silva. So it's been very interesting for me working in healthcare. It was the first job I took in healthcare, doing experience design mostly. I have previous experience in education, developing technologies in many different sectors. But joining Sinai has been amazing because they had no idea what design really was or what design really is. So when I joined in, it was really being the first person, as Stella said, just having like common languages like prototyping and things like that was like a learning process. And it's been quite a while now, and now we actually have a team, and that has evolved. So I'm gonna share with you guys some of the things that I've learned along the way of how to engage the system and hospital executives and users in the hospital system that are not familiar with the design processes and language that we're so familiar in our day-to-day lives. So one of the first, for me, one of the very important things is that when designing for a large healthcare system, we often think about the users, and sometimes the users are our patients, or sometimes our physicians. But we really also have to think about the system itself. And so, in order to get that buy-in from the hospital executives and everybody, having that alignment between both the system's needs as well as the patient needs has been very important for us to be able to be successful in our work. We often hear about patient-centered innovations. This is a jargon that you hear all the time around the hospital, but there is a misunderstanding among hospital executives of what that really means. Often they think that, oh, if we provide whatever the patient needs, then we're good, and it's not really about that. Otherwise, we'd just put a vending machine full of opioids in the waiting room, and there you go. Our patients are very satisfied. So yes, it's been very interesting trying to align both those needs, and sometimes those needs are not so much design-centered. It might be business-related, or might be a problem that requires some engineering, as Stella said, or showing our multidisciplinary team. But yeah, so and a second thing that was being very interesting in terms of being a designer, and conducting workshops and things of that nature, is that we have to always be really aware of the level of stakeholders we're trying to engage with in the hospital. And I'll give you an example. One of the first design workshop sessions we did, it was around prototyping some ideas that we have previously brainstormed around with hospital executives. And we have this huge plastic box full of really fun stuff like pipe cleaners, fur balls, paper collars, glitter, and things like that nature. And so we have this high-level executives in the room, and so we kind of briefed them and kind of guided them through the exercise. But when I put the box down on the table, it was just like the people's face was exactly like that. Like, we completely lost them. They looked at me like, what are we, in kindergarten? Like, I could not even get them back in the room. Like, we had to completely intervene and cut the session short. And so for me, that was very interesting to learn that whenever engaging different levels of stakeholders within the hospital system, I now have to be really smart about adapting some of those exercises and processes and making the workshop so we can really engage them and not make them feel like childish. And also, a lot of them get very uncomfortable with just the thought of having to draw something in a paper, which can be very interesting sometimes. But yeah, so when talking about human-centered design and in a hospital setting and having to engage with users, another problem that we have at Sinai is that, often relating to physicians, is that they're very busy. They don't have time to stop their day-to-day. So whenever I try to engage with them, this is kind of what I hear often.
Yeah, it's interesting because we asked one of our physicians what they thought about the process, and this is what they said. And we were insulted, but we thought that it was a really interesting insight. This person said, I start working even before I come into the office by checking my patient charts from home. When I am here in the clinic, I see all my patients from 8:40 to 5:30 in these 20-minute slots. In between visits, I fit in patient calls and loads of paperwork. Now my practice manager wants me to be filling out these quality reports from 3 different payers. And then just the other day, my boss tells me that things will get better because there's a group coming in to do some kind of practice transformation, and they want me to meet with some designer, whatever that means. I don't have time for any of that. I barely have time to see my patients.
Yeah, so, this is kind of the response at the beginning that I would get a lot if I went directly and approached a physician or try to engage them or set up time aside, whether to do an interview or invite them for a workshop exercise or whatever. So one of the things for us is being really important sometimes in order to engage them is having somebody like Dr. Safa, who is also a physician and now understands the design process really well and is able to engage with them prior. So by the time we get to do an exercise or interview them, they already understand the importance, but also coming from a physician like that. As she said earlier, the hospital system is very hierarchical, so sometimes it's really hard for us as a designer to engage directly with a physician who is also very busy. Another really, really big challenge for us in the system itself is when we're trying to get buy-in from high-level stakeholders to implement and do any sort of design research within the clinic, is that they always want to know what's the end result you're going to get. And as designers, it sometimes can be very challenging because design is, is an iterative and emergent process sometimes, and it can be very messy, and you need to go through many rounds of interviews, prototypes, and things like that. And they don't really understand, they want to know right away. So managing those expectations really early on in the process is very important, because in the beginning for us, like if I was just prototyping something in the clinic, they would foresee that as, oh, this is a final product. Meanwhile, that was just a learning tool for us to try to identify whether or not there was a viable solution we were implementing at the clinical setting. So yeah, so managing those expectations from the beginning at all levels within them, and keeping them informed with the design process. And Stella is very good about that, at pushing us to always be reporting, always be reporting. It's very important to get the buy-in that you need and the access, because it will also remove all the barriers you encounter in trying to design, implement, research, or do anything in a clinical setting.
So we found that kind of those three areas, one of kind of meeting your stakeholder where they are, two of figuring out how you can talk to one of your most important but busiest users, and then three, figuring out how to set expectations that are fair, were some of our earliest challenges that we had to really plow through pretty quickly. I think I would say that one of our main successes is just having this team, because each of us speaks a different language at different points. And we want to share with you kind of towards the end about what's happened because of this. Before I do so, I just want to say one thing that's been interesting is, we actually have been able to bring in some of the workshop-y elements and have really used those in a way that we now see changing people's meeting structure. So I went to a meeting the other day, and it was with some of these high-level execs, and they actually pulled out worksheets for us to work through. And I know that that is because we've now been there long enough where, like, they won't admit it, but they kind of like it. And it feels like a win, because I think sometimes it's these little kind of changes that you start to see that people are thinking in a different way. So some of the things that have resulted from this, when we got there and we realized that our mandate was to really change primary care, we said, okay, so what do people think about primary care? It took us a while to really be able to understand this, but using some of these principles, we were able to form a framework around what we want our ideal primary care to be. Because if you don't design with the end in mind, you're always just reacting. So now we've been able to get these primary care clinics to say, here are the principles behind how we want to operate as a clinic. And some of these are things like, we want to be able to follow our patients from end to end. So if a patient's in the clinic and I can understand what's happening with him or her, that's great. But I also need the technologies and the resources to know what's happening when they're in another hospital system or when they're home and they're sick. And so now we're developing on how to make that happen. Another thing that practitioners and clinicians have said that they wanted in their primary care practice is they want to understand what their financial models are. So how much money are they bringing in? How much are they spending? And it's funny because you would think that, of course, any business would have that. Our primary care clinics haven't had that, and that's foundational for them to be able to do their work. So there's 12 components that go into this primary care success framework that our team has been able to really drive out and develop. And now that we know what those components are, the work is happening now to really operationalize them. Another kind of, I would say, win that was an early win was in hanging out with the practices and listening to what some of their pain points have been. They would always say, the healthcare tells me that I need to listen to my patients, but half the time I don't really even know what my patients think, because the feedback tools that we have are coming back months later. We have something called the Prescanian caps that we use, and those come back 2 months after the fact. So if a patient had an issue, you don't hear it right away. So we created out a patient feedback tool that allows us to get these insights early on. Really, really simple to do, but something that we have found such an enjoyment from our practices to have, because they love feeling like they can pull in the voices of their patients in real time. And as I said, I think the biggest win for all of us is that we're starting to ask questions in a different way. And we're starting to introduce a different approach to dealing with some of these biggest challenges. And if you think about, I guess we've been doing this now for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years, the time that it's taken, sometimes for me, I feel very impatient because people's lives are literally on the line. But I would say that the work that's been done early on to just really invest in these culture changes is paying off, has paid off, and I think will continue to pay off moving forward. So we welcome any questions. Thank you.
Any questions?
It's a really, really excellent question. So we're very strategic about, if I will be very honest, about kind of not sitting anywhere. Because what happens in a lot of hospital systems is that if you're like the quality improvement group, you're going to get all and the kind of deadlines and, outcomes are very, very kind of hard. So what we do is we sit in multiple places. So we sit with our population health management group. We also sit in a global health institute. And then many of us also have appointments in different departments. So that means that we can enter where we need to when it's most helpful for us to help design early on and do some early prototyping and then give that work off to others to then carry it through. So what we didn't mention here is how much time has gone into just building our network so that we have kind of like, agents, if you will, who go off and carry out what we've set up and designed. So I can get more into the specifics, but we don't sit anywhere specifically by choice. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So we have a list, as you know, where we do general research in the clinics, and we come up with many problems and pain points that we can iterate. We have a set of design principles that we try to follow. So it needs to be scalable for us. It needs to be able to be implemented by a practice without much coaching. So we have like a set of guidelines that we have designed over the time that we try to identify whether or not some of those interventions will fulfill those in order to be able to be scalable, because our health system is really large. And as a small team, we can't really be hands-on at 36 primary care practices across the New York tri-state area. So so that's some of those.
And I would just add that I think in addition to the practice level, one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing is understanding what the system needs, because the practices will tell us things like, I want you to make, this waiting room look better and whatever. And the system is like, I need you to figure out how we can get paid. And so we listen to kind of both of those elements, figure out where the middle point is.
Yeah.
So part of the reason why we chose the patient feedback tool is that the hospital gets paid based on whether we fill a certain amount of Press Gainies, but patients never fill them because they don't think that anything happens with them. So by using a real-time patient feedback tool, it helps the practice, which wants this information, but it's going to eventually help the hospital because their response rates will go up. So it's that sweet spot of what both the system and the practice needs as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we do general needs assessment, so in different levels. So, and then we identify, and we have this backlog of needs. However, we have this 10 components list that we have created. That's the kind of like the primary care success guide of 10 components. So we try to operate within those 10 components. So we do a little bit of both. We look specifically on one of those components and see what are they needing that within the clinical setting, and then we also do general patient experience research and stuff, and then try to identify early wins and things that we can improve quickly.
And just to give it a little bit more structure, like we have 5 clinics that we call our discovery sites where we hang out all the time, just see what's happening on the ground, and then some of us who have to suffer go to all those big system meetings to understand what business folks are saying, what departmental heads are saying, and so we really keep our ear to the ground to make sure that we understand from both levels what's happening. But it is a combination of being at the practice and then some standing meetings. It's a fantastic question. So we see our patients as our most important people. However, they're the last people we've gotten to. So we've actually made a choice to not do intensive patient engagement at this point because there's so much that needs to happen on the systems and the practice side that we knew that if we got the patients in it at this point, it would actually serve as more of a disruptor. I think that we probably have another 4 to 6 months before we really start that patient engagement. But we started thinking about what it looks like. Are they focus groups? Are they patient advisory boards? All the practices have to have patient advisory boards, but they're useless. Patients don't come to them. So we have to redesign all of that. And if you're going to mess with patients, you really do need to come correct. And so we've been very purposeful about saving that for the end when we've set up these platforms well enough to be able to engage with them. But I think you've seen right to like the crux of the problem, like where are the patients in this? And not to say that Bruno doesn't engage with them all the time in the practices,
Yeah,
but in
we
a
do.
very kind of active way. That's like the last Pandora's box that we're looking towards, because it's so important. I don't know if we have time. I think we're out of time. We have 5 more minutes for questions if anyone has any more questions. Yeah.
It doesn't tie yet to the ToCap survey. No, it just provides a real-time insight to the practices, because usually at the practice level, for example, wait time is one of the biggest dissatisfaction at the clinics. So usually a practice manager is fully aware whether or not it's the front of the house or the back of the house that's holding the time. So that usually provides kind of insights of that nature. We do intend to eventually include that in the HCAHPS and the Guineas scores, but I think that's a process.
It's really interesting with yeah, I'll tell you in a second. It's 7 questions, but the reason why we chose it to be so short is that the Press Guinea and all those are so long, and a lot of our patients that are like lower health literacy or just sick and tired, right, don't want to be doing these surveys. But one thing we also found is, one thing as a clinician that I find is that when we evaluate kind of patients' assessment of our practice, it often comes to how they feel about their doctor, and most people really love their doctor, right? I hope. But they don't like the front desk sometimes, they don't like the checkout process, whatever it is. And a lot of surveys don't do a great job of really evaluating each of those. So we designed about, I think it's maximum 7 questions, but about 5 to 7 questions that hit every portion of their patient journey. So what was it like when you came in? What was it like when you were with the MAs and the nurse? What was it like when you were with the doctor? And it really and then we have a comment section at the end where they can just go wild, and some of them go wild.
Yeah.
And it's really, and the purpose of this isn't just to like see that people, we also do a net promoter score.
Yeah.
So people can see how much they would refer, like your practice. The purpose of this is really to drive operations, so that if you see that your MAs are the ones that are really, let's say, holding it back, the practice manager has data to say, like, we need to fix this line of work.
Yeah.
The work streams here aren't going well. And patients don't lie, they'll tell you. And so we found that keeping it short is super important, and trying to hit every line of the patient's journey has been part of what's been helpful. Yeah, we don't have the picture here,
We don't
but
have, yeah.
we do something where we have a big, it looks like that, and we have like little boxes where we put their comments up in the waiting room. So when patients are sitting there in the waiting room, they can see what other patients anonymously said about the practice. It's not on the website just because there's a whole bunch of issues with like being that transparent. But we found that patients seeing that their comments are being looked at and displayed makes them want to fill the survey more. And the practice, like when we put it up one time, I walked by some of the MAs and they were checking it out, and they were talking about like how this patient said something nice about one of them, and it creates this culture that keeps it going. So that they'll then recommend that patients fill the survey, and we put both positive and negative things. We don't put the most negative things up.
Yeah.
we put some things that are like, the waiting room is dirty, or things like
Yeah.
that. But yeah, we try to display it in the physical space in the clinic. I think the next phase would be to figure out how we can get it to patients, in a more kind of dispersed way. Yeah. So I mentioned the Mount Sinai Health Partners. That's the way right now that's doing most of the funding. But these are all such early prototypes that the question, so for instance, the patient feedback tool, when we get to the point where we can scale, that's going to require a whole separate funding line. And that's when Sinai has to really decide, do you mean what you've said about population health management? Like, because you will need to invest in these.
Yeah.
But I think first proving that it works, we've been lucky that we have a group that's kind of been funding and pushing this forward. Eventually, again, when practices own their P&Ls a little bit more, they will be able to make these assessments as well. But I'll say that part of the reason why this space and this work is so important for us is because sure, we're creating tools, but there are other tools out there that are not conventional to the healthcare system that maybe we can understand and then feed into a system like Sinai. So it actually really matters that we meet and talk with other people that are designing some of these things, because our clinic and our health system really needs as much as we can get. We need all the help we can get. Great.
Fine. Thank you. You want me to?
Do a bit of a laptop swap out
Yeah.
here.
Do you want me?
Now, one of the things that I firmly believe about bettering our work in whatever work we do is to make sure that we kind of look outside of our bubbles. And so to that extent, what I've always tried to do with this track is make sure that we bring in folks from outside of healthcare to share their perspectives, not just of healthcare, but the work they're doing. And so with that, I invited Richard here. Richard is with Capital One. And you can imagine thinking about financial services that while it might not be exactly the same, there are a lot of the same challenges with things like old technology, old ways of doing things, regulations, slowness, and so I think if we take some time to kind of look outside of healthcare, we can find interesting ways of tackling problems. So with that, let me introduce Richard Dalton. Richard has been involved in design since graduating from the University of Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK in 1994 with a degree in software engineering that he didn't know what to do with. In 1999, 2 web design startups in the UK later, he moved to the US and has been leading design teams in large organizations ever since, first with Vanguard, then at USAA, and now in New York City as VP, Head of Design for Capital One's Commercial Bank. Richard is active in the design community, having spoken at conferences across the country on the topics of design leadership, measurement, and the importance of experience management systems. He chaired the 2008 IA Summit in Miami, which gave him a new appreciation for conference organizers everywhere. Richard.
Thank you, Adam. Do we have slides?
I got a black screen right now, for some reason.
I can talk without slides. Did I plug the right thing in?
Did you use the one that was in Bruno's?
Mm-hmm. Let's do it. Try that one.
Try that one.
Oh, that's
Oh, that's your.
What's this? Let me plug this in. Talk amongst yourselves.
You have anything? No? All right, try this one. Anything? Those are both the HDMI hookups that are here.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, ready. Just going to make sure the laptop doesn't slide off. All right, there we go. Okay, so thank you for your patience. Adam, I do have a confession to make. After which you can tell me whether you want me to continue. I hate the word innovation.
Get out.
Okay. Actually, hate is probably a little strong. I have this love-hate relationship with the word innovation. I love the concept that it embodies, right? Solving problems in new, interesting, and oftentimes surprising ways. But the problem I have with it is that it's just not actionable, right? You can be like, okay, stand back, I'm going to innovate, right? It doesn't, like, all we can do as leaders in organizations is create the environment where innovation can be nurtured and fostered. And there's many aspects that go into that, and one of which I'm going to talk about today. But let's start with a story and a couple of examples. Who flew here to be at this conference? Okay, me too. This is what your flight experience was like, right? A lot of champagne, private cubicle, Pringles, flowers, right? No? No? Okay, what about room service? Anybody had room service in the last week or two? I have. It's like this, right? Water, toweling robes, the fruit. If you can see, this picture was taken in like the 80s or something. No? No? Not your room service experience? This is what my room service experience is typically like. In fact, I stayed at the Venetian Hotel in Vegas in October. I didn't take this picture. Now, the Venetian is the second largest hotel chain or hotel complex in the world. It's got over 7,000 rooms and suites. And I was at the Money 2020 conference, which had over 11,000 attendees in the Venetian's convention center. And for 5 days, I called for breakfast for room service from my room. Actually, the first day, I was only serious on the first day. The other 4, I continued calling because I honestly wanted examples for talks like this. And every single one of those 5 days that I called, they quoted me 90 minutes for breakfast, for room service. 1.5 hour wait for room service for breakfast.
You're locked.
1 second. Okay. Stay. Stay. We can just put it up here if you want. Thanks. Is it gonna fall?
No,
That's
I will
okay.
stay here and guard
It's
it.
my work. It's my work laptop. It's okay. 90 minutes. Okay. Now they knew. Most hotels know how many people are staying in the hotel, right? And they knew they had an 11,000 person conference going on downstairs. Like, you don't think they could have hired a few more kitchen and wait staff to get the wait down to, I don't know, less than an hour maybe, right? And don't get me started about my flying experiences. Okay. I'm sure you've all got horror stories about your airline experiences. Hopefully, none of them as tragic as this poor unfortunate gentleman that was dragged off the United flight a few weeks ago, or a couple of months ago. How about this example? There's a large financial services company. One of its customers was hit by a cement truck on the highway. And as the customer was standing at the side of the highway, on the call, on the phone with the claims associate, with a cement truck parked behind him, all the traffic whizzing by on the busy highway, giving the details of the accident, that claims associate chose that moment to try and cross-sell him a credit card. No. This is not the greatest time. The associate wouldn't let go because they're trained to overcome objections, right? Well, could we call you back in the future? Would you be interested in the future? Would your wife be interested? No, right? I mean, how does this kind of stuff happen? It happens because this is actually a picture of the podium with all the wires that I took earlier. It happens because our experiences and our organizations are horrendously complicated, right? Millions of either customers or users or members or patients, thousands and thousands of employees, hundreds of technical systems, thousands of pieces of information, hundreds or thousands of products or services, business rules, logic, all of this stuff mashed together in these complex ecosystems. That's important. Whoever had 4.5 minutes for the Steve Jobs quote, by the way, well done. It's important because connections and common language is critical to doing innovation and to translating it into action. You can replace creativity with innovation here, right? Innovation is just connecting things. When you ask innovative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they didn't really do it. They just saw something. It seemed obvious to them after a while. That's because they were able to connect experiences they've had and synthesize new things. It's okay, it's meant to be blank. But we're not, our organizations, right, we haven't been sitting on our laurels, right? We try within our organizations, we try to make things simpler. We run process improvement initiatives. We run Six Sigma stuff and DMAIC efforts. We inventory our systems and our touch points and our technology and our information. We think about our data architectures, right? We try to make these things simpler. But in many cases, it feels You got to feel bad for the guy. They actually went on to lose the game, which makes it even worse. It's all about understanding causality. It's all about understanding if we push a domino over, what the effects of that dominoes are going to be. Now, fortunately, there is a practice and a discipline which tries to address this, which tries to fix this. It's called enterprise architecture. There are books written about enterprise architecture, 3 in particular. There are conferences about enterprise architecture. There are consulting companies that have made hundreds of millions of dollars around enterprise architecture over the past 20, 25, 30 years. Accenture in particular will come in and assess your people, process, technology, and information. But all of these books, and I've read each of these books, all of these books remind me of a scene from one of my favorite movies. Oh, I'm sorry. I know these books. The conclusions are all wrong. They acted stupidly. Because all of these books omit the most important aspect of our organizations. They all have these models that they create that talk about the people, the process, the technology, the information, the strategy, the capabilities, the data architecture, the applications architecture. None of them talk about the experience. None of them talk about the way that we actually interact with the users, the members, the customers, the patients in our systems. So if we tweak a business rule or set up a business process to fly some airline stewards and stewardesses or flight crew across the country so that they're not late for another plane, that then results in somebody getting dragged off, a customer getting dragged off the plane. We can't understand those connections. And so that results in these horrible experiences or in opportunities for innovation lost. If you think about a business, an organization as a cube, with each face of the cube representing a different aspect of the organization, whether it's profit and loss, or business rules, or people and training, or technology, risk management. And in the middle of the cube is that nest of wiring that connects every face of the cube to every other face, so you can start to see, well, if I make a change on this face, what's the implications to the other faces? The one face that's missing that none of these enterprise architecture books talk about, which we need to add back, is the experience face. Because now you can start to see, okay, if we make a change here, this is the impact. It causes someone to wait 90 minutes for breakfast. If we make a change here, it causes someone to get dragged off the plane, or it causes them to get an inappropriately timed credit card offer. And once we start to think about adding the experience face back to our models, we can start to even organize around it. So, first of all, who's this happy in a supermarket? I'm sorry, but like the only person that's not smiling here is the baby, right? So USAA, one of my former employers, started doing something very interesting a couple of years ago. A traditional bank is organized by product line, by P&L, right? So a checking, P&L, group, savings, credit card, home loan, auto loan. So that means that the debit card that I have in my wallet and the credit card that I have in my wallet are completely in 2 different departments, 2 different P&Ls, 2 different groups, 2 different, even though I can use either of them almost identically in a supermarket to buy my products. What USA started to do was say, no more. We're not going to have separate P&Ls for these different product lines. We're not going to have product owners even, product management. We're going to have experience management. We're going to have experience owners. And so they, at the very top level of the bank, now reporting to the president of the bank, have these experience teams where they have a daily spending experience ownership group, which contains both the checking account and the credit card products. And so now they've got one group of people that can start thinking about, okay, how do we innovate? How do we satisfy the needs of somebody in a supermarket wondering about, well, should I put this on my check? Should I buy this purchase with my checking account or with my credit card? How much do I have on either one? Are there points to be earned? Like, how do I make that decision? Now they've got one group that can focus on that. So how do we do this? How do we add that experience face back? Some practical advice. This is what's called a mental model diagram in the industry. I'll flip forward since you saw it anyway. This book, Mental Models by Indy Young, who pioneered this technique, is an awesome book. Mental models represent the activities that a user, I'll just use that term generally, but you could replace any specific word there, member, patient, customer, employee even. The activities and tasks that a user experiences as they go through a scenario or situation in life. These stacks and end up being boxes in these, I'll show you in a second, represent the major phases. Underneath the horizon line are all of the touch points, all of the web pages, the mobile screens, the telephone calls, the pieces of paper, the faxes, the emails, the physical interactions with people, the pieces of plastic that you use to buy something in a store, whatever your domain is, right? Every single way that a customer or member or patient user interacts with your organization, and you map them against the ones that they the tasks that they satisfy. And when you start to do this, and when you gather this information, you don't ask people what they want, right? You go and watch people doing whatever it is they're doing. You go and observe them if possible. You talk to them. Why did you do that? How was it making you feel? Who did you talk to? What were you thinking, right? Find out that stuff. And then you go and inventory all your stuff, right? This is kind of the boring stuff with big Excel sheets, right? Inventory all of your touch points and you create these maps. Because then you can start to see gaps. You can start to see where you've got tasks and no touch points. You're not really helping anybody do that task, which could be okay. Maybe not be might not be your organization's thing, right? But maybe there's a gap there. You also start to see touch points you provided because you thought it was a good idea at the time, but nobody actually cares because there's no task that they're satisfying. You get rid of those ones. Great book by Indy, as I mentioned. She's been consulting on this and teaching this technique for 20 years. And what you can start to do is it helps you map your activities, thoughts, and goals through these different life scenarios. Some of these life scenarios will be big, meaningful things, right? Big life events. Some of them will be more trivial, right? And you can connect all of your user research to your touch points, and through those touch points to all those other faces of the cube, right? Your projects, your products, your planning, your business rules. So if we take marriage, for example, I realize you can't read these boxes, that's okay. What you're seeing here is a small section of the overall model for marriage, and so you would have boxes above here, things like, propose and, choose a ring, buy a ring, finance a ring, insure a ring, find a caterer, plan the reception, go on, plan your honeymoon, go on a honeymoon, that type of stuff, right, above the line. And below the line here, we see all the different touch points across all the different channels, web pages, mobile screens, phone calls, etc. And then you can start to turn these things red, green, and yellow, right? You can say, hey, what would be a good metric behind this touch point that would indicate whether or not it's satisfying these tasks well, right? And then you can put some thresholds on that metric, and you can start to shade them red, green, and yellow. So this now starts to become more a live dashboard for the health of your experience. Someone in the last talk, one of the questions was, how do you decide what to work on? Well, I would suggest the red things. You can go even one deeper. You can start to say, well, let me tap on one of these touch points, right? And now I can zoom in to just that touch point and say, what are all those different faces of the cube that it's connected to? What are the products that are supporting this touch point? What are the business rules? What are the business processes? What projects are already improving this touch point? And also, if there's a business process, let's say, that's connected to this touch point, it's very likely connected to like 99 other touch points as well. And if I change that business process to make some improvement to this touch point, what are my unintended consequences to the other 99 touch points? I don't want to screw those ones up just to fix this one. This is critically important because innovation is a team sport. We heard about the diverse group that Bruno and Stella have collected to do this type of work, right? But even diverse groups, they need common language, right? They need to be able to understand the domain that they're operating within. So, quick recap. To understand our users, right? I don't mean, asking them what they want, right? Go and observe them, go and talk to them, ask them how they're feeling. We need to use that information we've gathered and map all of their tasks and activities and emotions to the touch points that we have in our ecosystems. All the web pages, the mobile screens, the physical interactions we have with people, the products we have. And then we need to connect all of those on-stage touch points, right? Think of all the touch points as the on-stage, the way that somebody interacts with the organization, that face of the cube. We need to connect all that to all the off-stage stuff, the messy wiring that keeps our businesses running, our organizations running, right? The people, the training, the money, the risk, the business processes. And then we need to use that as a common language to bring diverse teams together so that we can both identify issues in our ecosystems and our experiences and identify opportunities in our experiences. So I'll finish with a last example story here. I used a lot of negative examples, but here's a positive one. That same financial service company that offered the inappropriately timed credit card to the poor customer that was in the auto accident, I had another customer. This customer was driving home one night in Virginia a couple of years ago with their 2 small children in the car. When they got to their neighborhood, they discovered that there was a huge home fire in their neighborhood. It tragically put 20 different families out of their homes. Now, fortunately for Mr. Smith, his family was unhurt and his home was undamaged. But the very next morning, first thing in the morning, he gets an unexpected call from the financial services company. Oh, Mr. Smith, we heard there was a huge home fire in your neighborhood. We just wanted to check in that you and your family and even your neighbors were okay. Is there anything at all we can do for you? He was floored. I mean, he was stunned. In later communications with the company, he described it as the most professional yet personal and compassionate interaction he'd ever had with a company in his life. And he was a 20-year veteran of the luxury hotel industry, hopefully not the Venetian. So he knew a personal interaction when he saw one. He had just thought of this company as someone he bought home insurance from for 15 years. Now he thinks of them as, a trusted partner. They've got his back, right? He's talking about this. He's putting it on social media. It's all over the place, right? This type of outreach, the innovation that caused someone to say, hey, we're an insurance company. We don't have to wait for people to call us, right? We can be proactive here rather than reactive. That type of innovation and execution of that innovation was only possible because they understood the different moving parts in their ecosystem. Thank you very much. What questions do you have?
We have some time for questions.
I can kick us off. So I'm curious, kind of taking the dashboard that you showed as an example. So how would something like that help prevent that inappropriately timed credit card offer?
So, couple of ways, I think a couple of answers there. One is that by understanding the different touch points you have with your users, you can start to look at them in aggregate. Right? You can start to see here are all the different ways that we touch. What are all the different conditions that we touch a user? Right? Mm-hmm. When somebody is in if you do a mental model for reporting a car accident or being in a car accident, for example, right? It's just as useful to be able to say, what do we want to talk to people about, as much as what don't we want to talk to people about, right? You can start to say, oh, where should we suppress, right? What otherwise might be happening, right? Because you'll have other models where people are calling in less sensitive situations, for example, where suddenly this box of offer a credit card will show up, right? And because it's in these other models, you can start to see the connections about, well, you know, it shows up here, where shouldn't it show up? And so then you can start to go in and kind of program it. It also, I think, helps you catch issues much quicker, right? This particular one of an inappropriately timed credit card, right, got caught because somebody happened to mention it within the organization, and then some executive in the organization started to use it as an example, right? And so it got resolved, and you can be sure no one's getting those again. But there's probably many things like that, right, that are going on, which aren't raising to the level of awareness within the organization, and they're still having these inappropriate conversations around. And so visualizing it in this way, making that connection, kind of showcases, it shines the flashlight on the problem. What other questions do you have?
So, one of the issues with journey maps is that they give all these points, right? They give these boxes like offer, or like issues whenever I'm shopping, never be happy. How do you approach situations or training your employees to approach situations that don't fall into those boxes, where like multiple variables come into play, there's no real tidy answer on their screen that can say a credit card. How do you guys deal with that?
So the question, I think, is how do we deal with a non-happy path or non-standard experiences? And you mentioned journey maps, and I think that so for other people in the room, journey maps tend to be kind of a fairly high-level expression of a flow through an experience. I kind of categorize the journey maps as kind of like the 10,000 foot, view level. And the mental models that we looked at here as the kind of treetop level, right, view of an experience. Journey maps, as the name suggests, tend to track one specific path through an experience. Mental models tend to kind of basically just show all the possible ones. You could even start to maybe notice at the top of the screen there, when I showed it, there was a kind of a line, but you can start to use a mental model to kind of track a specific journey through. But I think that's the difference in that the mental models are basically just showing the ecosystem, not necessarily tracking a path through it, although they do tend to be kind of time-based from left to right, but not necessarily so. So it's about possibilities rather than probabilities from a mental model to a journey map perspective. I'm not sure if that quite answers your question. But
Interesting.
okay. Was there a question?
Yeah, I was thinking about the communication and connecting that's essential, and that seems like such a long-term ordeal. Do you have any suggestions or like what's a time frame, or where do you start? Because that's so basic and it's so essential, and it's missing in so many places.
Yeah, I mean, I think that these types of initiatives can be a little daunting. It's massive, right? I think it is possible to start in very small places, either on very narrow slivers of an experience, right? Kind of define a start and an end, and dive in deeply within one specific area, and kind of and then expand out sideways. Another thing, though, I think is just changing the terminology, or even setting terminology around pieces of the kind of the ecosystem. So even getting away from internal terms for pieces of the process, or so for example, at USAA, people used to start referring to kind of experiences as the pay, or make a payment experience from a credit card perspective, because that was the business's perspective of what someone was doing, right, making a payment. But to a customer or member, as we used to call them at USAA, that was really just kind of paying my bill, right? Well, even just, and by the way, that was probably within the context of paying a lot of bills, because people tend to pay their bills, or many people pay their bills, once or twice a month within the collection rather than one-off. And so understanding that just changing that language to be more from a user-centric perspective, and getting everybody to use it, starts to chip away at these types of issues from a language and a communication connection perspective. It doesn't all have to be like a massive scale. You know, even just very small tweaks of language can have massive impact. Another quick example, not related to this, is that there's a great video about an ex-submarine captain called David Marquette, and he talks about how he changed the language on his submarine because there was a lot of divisiveness and siloing on his submarine, and he banned the word they, and instead he said, we're going to use the word we. Whenever you said they, say we, because he used to have people come up to him from his weapons room saying, you know, sir, we can't load the submarines because they ordered the wrong part, talking about the maintenance. He used to be like, sir, we can't load the torpedoes because we ordered the wrong part. I've got to talk to maintenance, right? It brought that sense of sharedness. So just tweaking language like that can have a profound impact.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so our final speaker today is Caleb Dean. And Caleb is founder and managing director of Owl, Fox & Dean, where he and his team worked at the intersection of organizational design, change management, and leadership development to help bold companies and individuals increase their capacity to evolve and generate value for people and place. His work blends the disciplines of systems thinking, design, business strategy, organizational development, sustainability, and storytelling. Caleb.
Thank you. It's a little chilly in here, right? Yeah. Let's shut down.
We get it.
Yeah. Okay. So I am another one of those outsiders. I don't work in the healthcare industry, but I do, in both of my jobs, speak about health and wellness all day long. So in addition to having a consulting firm, my wife and I also run a natural products retail business in Cambridge, right in Porter Square. So we, which is a 43-year-old business, and we have this really incredible opportunity because 500 customers walk in a day. We have 25 staff. We have lots of moving parts, and we get to speak and engage with them all day long. So we learn a lot constantly. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is first a high-level concept, and then we're going to get into exactly how we integrate that into organizations, both I'll tell you examples as a consultant and also in the organization that I run. So the high-level concept is something I refer to as whole brand authenticity. So this is, again, does anyone know the Eames video, The Power of 10? Do you know that? Yeah, so I like to think about organizations in all of those different levels. I think it's incredibly aspirational, but that's what we need to do. We need to zoom way out. We need to zoom way in. So simply, whole brand authenticity is that the organization embodies the brand and the brand embodies the organization. So they need to be one and the same. And to start with brand, my favorite definition of brand is from a guy named Marty Neumeier, who wrote a book called Zag. And his definition is a brand is a person's gut feeling about a product, service, or company. And what I love about this is that it has nothing to do with the organization itself, other than the fact that it's the experience. So it lives outside of the product or the service. It's experienced in all of the collective capacities that people interact with it. So it's not something you can control. It's something that you can influence. So to talk about this concept of whole brand authenticity, where this comes from is the concept of wholeness, and kind of the opposite of wholeness is the concept of fragmentation. So we've traditionally looked at organizations from a very fragmented view, right? We have the internal experience and we have the external experience, the customer and the employee. And I think we need to start moving away from that. With so much transparency now, with people moving from different organizations back and forth, and with social media, we know what it's like to work in another organization, even if we just have a friend who works there. So if you've ever heard like, oh, it's a really great product, but I heard it sucks to work there, right? That's something that you want to be really cautious of, because why would you want to support that product, right, or service? So the high-level example of fragmentation is when Einstein figured out that acceleration and gravity are actually the same force. This was one of his proudest moments, and that's what we're getting at. Like, the employee experience and the customer experience are really the same. That's what we're moving toward. I also like to think of this as a forest, right? We can see the tree, we see the trunk, we see the branches, we see the leaves, but we also know through science and study and knowledge and wisdom over time that there's a complex root system underneath, and trees actually communicate with one another. And we zoom out more, and we know that there's mycelium that connects different species of trees, and they send nutrients around. And it's a really complex ecosystem. My background's actually in environmental design, so I think in these types of concepts here. But I think this is how, I think a forest metaphor for an organization is a little more relevant than what we used to define it as a tree, right? I think we need to expand and zoom out and see all the different pathways of kind of in the complexity. I think it's a way of honoring complexity. So wholeness on the other side is seeing those things, kind of that essence for what it is, and it's kind of the combination of all of those experiences. Another physicist named David Bohm, he defines it as it's in a constant state of progress or becoming. So a brand is kind of this living thing that is always in a state of progress or becoming. So with every single experience that anyone has, internal or external, that is the definition of the brand, right? That is what's happening. That is like, it's building. And if it's always moving, it's either integrating or disintegrating, right? So we'll start with brand disintegration because that's what's most visible and that's what makes headlines, right? So examples of the way to get there is, when have you ever felt deceived by a brand, right? Richard, you spoke about, the phone call on the side of the road. How many times have you been completely frustrated with a Comcast, right? I think about it in terms of they're in the business of connectivity, yet there's so many documented cases of it being extremely impossible to connect with someone, right? What's that about? It's innate, and it's not like overt, but it's there, right? Like, where does that frustration come from? A really good example that I like is Mass Brothers chocolate. I don't know if have you guys seen? Do you know Mass Brothers chocolate? Yeah. So a year and a half or so ago, this headline broke. And this is perfect. So how the Mass Brothers fooled the world into paying $10 a bar for crappy hipster chocolate, right? That's a good headline. And what they found out was, it's these two bearded brothers. They're in Brooklyn. They're like craft makers in some warehouse, but what happened is they found out that the chocolate was actually, some of the chocolate was actually being imported from Belgium, and they were mixing different ingredients together and selling it as bean to bar, right? So on a simple level, this is not what they said they were. But the thing with disintegration, and that when it's always moving, like it's kind of like resentment in an organization. It's really alluring. It's kind of sexy. So people are like, why don't I feel really bad about that too? Like I should be mad about that too. So then they piled it on, and they're like, when these brothers, I saw this in an article. They're like, when those brothers moved to New York, they didn't even have beards, right? Those beards aren't. And it's like, of course they didn't, But like, what's more of a New York story than moving to New York and reinventing yourself? But like, it just piled on, and they lost a lot of business. They've had to reinvent themselves, and I think they're moving back toward integration because they said one thing, but people found out they were doing another. And I think what's happening is that there's more and more of these instances. And I think from a healthcare perspective, we need to understand what that looks like. Like, what are we saying we're providing, and what are we actually doing? So the way to get there in your own organization, when has your customer felt deceived by an experience with your product or service, right? That's a question to ask. So brand disintegration equals brand inauthenticity, right? So then we can talk about brand integration. And one of my favorite examples of this is a company called Badger. And I don't know if you've seen them. They make salves and balms and chapstick and sunscreen. And I've always liked their logo. I don't know why. They seem like this. They seem like they've been around forever. They seem authentic. They seem like my grandmother would use it. I think she had a little painting of an animal. I don't know. Something about it just reminds me of family. And it's a really personal experience. And that's what brand is. It's a personal experience. So when I had the opportunity, we sell their products in the store. So when I had the opportunity to go visit them in New Hampshire, that familial, that family essence was reinforced because I learned that they have this program, and it's not daycare, it's actually new parents can bring babies to work and other coworkers look after them, right? So babies are integrated into the organization, right? Like they're just being held and they're walked around. And these guys do, you know, many millions of dollars in sales a year. They make lots of products. They're growing like crazy. And it's because I think people understand what they are, and it's true, right? It's really true, and there's experiences are reinforced. So brand integration equals, or authenticity, right? So that's where we're going. We want to, rather than disintegrating over all of the complex experiences, you want to be integrating. So it's constantly moving, and it's what's important in this instance is that it's not good or bad. It just is. We're always moving. It's always shifting. It's always happening. So let's create the momentum so you're moving toward integration. So that's when we get to, so taking this high-level concept, what do you actually do with it? So getting into what I call whole brand organization design. So that is, like I said, the internal experience must authentically embody the external image, right? And we're a small family retail business. I'm also a consultant, but in the retail business, what we've moved away from, the customer is always right, because the customer is actually not the most important group of people, stakeholder in our business. It's actually our employees. So we have 25 employees, there's 4 owners. We cannot run the business without them. When 500 customers walk in a day, those employees need to be well, they need to be healthy. If they're selling stress supplements, they can't be stressed out, right? Like they have to come in and authentically feel. They need to be able to pay for they need to be able to afford the things that we sell, right? They need to be able to afford the products. So to do this, to design an organization in a way that the internal experience embodies the external image, you need to let go of all sense of control. And what you do is you need to move toward designing the conditions, creating the conditions that allow people to experience those things, right? So rather than, you cannot control another human being, you can manipulate things and you can make things and you can do things, but what I'm advocating for is really focusing on those conditions. And in a retail business, it's, you know, people just walk in. It's probably a lot like a lot of healthcare. People come in, they need something, you help them, and you know, hopefully everyone is happy and well afterward. So there's a few steps to getting there. So one is to define your intended brand experience, right? So what is it that you want them to feel, right? What is that? And we get back to this that's a microflora in your gut. And what I love now is that definition of a gut reaction, that gut feeling is actually, there's really great science coming out right now that your gut is a sensing organ, right? And there is that mind-body connection. So it's real. And so the question here is, when someone experiences any aspect of your organization, what do you want them to feel? So then we get into, and we've talked about journey mapping, right? And I won't go deep into this, but what needs to happen here is you need to map the stakeholder experience. And this is a very simple image, but the idea is, and this echoing what Richard said too, we become very good at mapping the customer experiences in the design world. I think of it from my kind of landscape design, GSD map and overlays of different experiences over one another, right? So you have the customer experience, you have the employee experience. We map the vendor experience. We map the delivery experience. When they come in the back door, I want them to be met with the same joy and wellness that the people walking in the front door are met with, because that's what reinforces the brand over and over and over again. So what you're looking for are those critical interactions, right, that we talked about before. So the questions here are, what are the critical points of interaction between internal and external experiences, and what are the gaps in the internal experience of your brand? So then we get into actually designing organizational systems to reinforce the intended brand experience. And there's, when we think about systems, an organizational system, this is how I define it. I think it needs to do 4 things. One, it needs to provide an opportunity, so something needs to increase. So this comes from systems thinking, right? You can think of it as a causal loop diagram, if you guys know. Something goes up. Second, there needs to be accountability. So first, so there needs to be someone who is accountable for ensuring that increase, right? And then there's someone or some group of people. So it's a team or a role or a job description. Then there's durability, right? These are tangible rituals and artifacts that you make and you do that withstand those people, if the individual people in those roles that are accountable leaving, because that person could leave and then all is lost. But a really good system provides that durability. And then the fourth is adaptability, and that's where metrics come in, right? That's where you actually see the measurement, you see the increase. And it's not just that thing going up, but you can find metrics that you're already looking for. So this is a really simple framework that I designed to work to help develop this and develop systems internally. So you can see it's an organizing tool. It's not meant to solve all of your problems. But what it does is create a workflow and a work plan for moving, kind of developing these internal systems over time. And I like to think of this as a long-term, constant conversation. Like, this is constant work, right? You can engage in this developing and refining systems constantly. So the questions here are: what do you want to increase? Who will be accountable for ensuring the increase? What tangible rituals and artifacts will support the increase? And then in what metrics will this increase be visible? Thank you. So I want to give you an example of what this looks like for the store that my wife and I run. Cambridge Naturals. Like I said, we're 43 years old. Our parents started when they were 23 years old. They're still there. I run a business with my wife and my in-laws. So it's a really fun experience, and it's a complex place to work. So there are 3 things that we want the customer and the employees and everyone who experiences our business to feel. And they're critically important for our brand and our business model. So the first one is community. We want people to feel a sense of community. We want people to be a part of a community. And we set out, our mission is to be a community source for health and wellness, right? And it's very, very important to us. So we need to define what that means, right? We can't just say it and hope it exists and hope it's true. The way we've broken it out is that the further in, if we zoom in, that's the local community, the global community, the industry community, and the independent business community. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I want you to see how it's organized and how it breaks down. So if you take the global community, those that are responsible, the leads that are responsible for that are the ownership team and the department leads. The rituals and artifacts that that you can tangibly make and do, we're B Corp certified. We have supply chain story talking points for all of our products. We have staff trainings from suppliers. We have buying guidelines. We have department level philosophies. So we zoom in and we do this at a lot of different levels. And then we can actually see this in our margins. We can see this in our sales and our sales as they relate to vendor training, and we see this in the number of blog posts that are written and the response rate with those things. That's community, and this is what it looks like. This is a really happy person in a store, a real person. This is a local vendor who makes cashew milk right down the street, and this is us visiting another local vendor. So health and wellness is the second one that is critically important for our business model and our brand, right? Like I said, you wouldn't buy a stress supplement from us if we were visibly stressed out and hated working there, right? That's it just wouldn't happen, or it would be a bad experience and you'd return it. So we define that in greater detail, like I did before: physical health, mental health, financial health, and creative health. The financial health is a new one for us, and we're taking more steps to make sure that happens. We live in a very competitive place to work. In Cambridge, there's something like 4% unemployment, which is basically negative unemployment. And we're really, and this This approach, just as a slight side note, is critical for talent. We actually have people who just graduated from Ivy League schools and people leaving well-paid lab jobs to come work for us because of kind of where we stand on this. And I think it can be applied to every industry. So the financial health, we're moving towards something called open book management, which is allowing people to engage with the finances in new ways so they actually know what is being spent where and what that means. And we've also raised our starting pay to a living wage. So that's a really important thing for us. So that's how we're starting to integrate that into the business. We do different types of kind of wellness demos for staff and customers, and this is when we release the living wage. And then knowledge. So knowledge is really important, and we were talking earlier about, because we are not doctors or pharmacists, we can't diagnose or prescribe. There are very strict laws about how we sell these things, and the bulk herb section, which was just in that last image, is actually this real place of community, and for a diverse group of people, it's actually the first place they go for healthcare. They find herbs. We have a selection of 140 different types of herbs, and they're coming in there, helping to find herbs that help with allergies and immune support and all of that. But the knowledge is really critical because we need to know what we can and cannot say legally, but we also need to know how to speak to the different qualities of the different things we sell. We have 16,000 unique products, and we also we need to know how to ask really good questions, and we need to know about our customers and where they come from. So what that looks like is product knowledge, social interpersonal knowledge, and industry knowledge, and then economic knowledge. And these are all the ways that we integrate that into the organization itself. So it's something that's practiced every single day. And I'm hoping what this gives you is a sense of taking this high-level concept, like for us it's community, health and wellness, and knowledge, something that we want everyone to experience whenever they interact with any part of our business, and how we integrate it in on a really just a daily kind of minute level. Like, we have a reading list in the back. If I went back to the health and wellness, the physical wellness, I am on every single employee to be hydrated, right? Like, I swear to God, most interpersonal conflict would be avoided if people were adequately hydrated. I swear to God. You can test it out. So moving forward, that's, we train, we do a lot of different trainings, and we're always engaging with one another. So what we're going through right now is a process of taking all of our core values and going through this system and developing systems so that they're reinforced every day. So I'm hoping that what you guys can see in this is some inspiration in how you can take innovation or creativity or whatever it is and start to work it into the kind of the minutia, like the DNA of the organization, so that it's felt, right? And if you feel like you have no control, start with yourself. What can you do to make yourself feel those things, and then how can you expand that out? So thank you. There's some questions.
We have time for a few questions. I've got one.
Okay.
So I know you from your consulting work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so in taking what you've done as a consultant.
Yeah.
And bringing it back to now your retail business.
Yeah.
What would you say is maybe your greatest mistake?
In the retail business?
Yeah, and then applying something.
Yeah.
What have you learned from kind of, rather than just applying it with a customer, but now applying it with you and your wife?
Yeah, good question. Not realizing that I am part of the system. I've been very used to seeing things as an outsider. It's a comfortable place for me personally. But as a consultant, that's where I tend to come from. I'm outside, I can ask really stupid questions. And there was about a year grace period where I was like, I'm still, because I still do a lot of consulting, but I am very much part of that system. And I think that's a meta lesson too. And like, we are all part of this system. I love the know they, like that's a perfect way to think about it. But that's something, like actually being part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? Lunchtime? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for coming, everybody.